and try to share. Hi, everyone. I'm glad you could attend. I am somewhat new to UXPA New Hampshire, so I'm hoping to be a little bit more involved as we go forward. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it's like to work in a small UI UX team in a very a medium-sized organization that is very technically focused and very high-tech based. It can be very challenging. And there's a lot of obstacles that you have to overcome to sort of get that UX point across. But having the UX skills can often help you to do that. So my name is Julie Jacob, and I work as the UI UX design lead for Berkshire Grey, which is a robotics or a logistics robotics company in Massachusetts, in Bedford, Massachusetts, primarily working for large retailers and shipping companies to automate their systems. And you may also notice I'm a traveling knight of the realm. This is relevant only loosely, and I'll get to exactly why in a second. What I mean by that is I actually participate in a sport called Boohurt. It is a medieval combat sport using real steel weapons, real steel armor. And we do these competitions all over the country and all over the world. So I do a lot of traveling to go to these events. And I've had the privilege of traveling to Spain and also to Scotland, and I'll be traveling to Germany in August. So one of the things that comes with this is a lot of exposure to people who speak different languages and who also have a completely different culture. So I have had experiences with talking to people, even having learned, for instance, Spanish. I spent a couple of years trying to learn Spanish because we were supposed to go in 2020. And obviously we didn't go in 2020, so we ended up not going until 2023, May of last year. So I had plenty of time to learn the language. I'm not very good at foreign languages, as it turns out. But one of the experiences that I had there was we were in a very small region of Spain. And of course, there's different dialects and different, accents. And I'm not even going to try to butcher the language right now, but I was trying to ask for rice. And because I'm gluten intolerant, so I was trying to find food I could eat. So I'm trying to ask if they have any rice. And I must have said, arroz, I'm like I said, I'm not going to butcher it too badly. I tried to say it in every way I could possibly say it, and they were just looking at me like I had three heads. And eventually, some very kind soul said it properly. Apparently, I was saying it very improperly, and I was like, see, and he understood I was asking for rice, and we finally got some rice, and I was able to eat. But there was this whole interaction where I was trying very hard to make them understand what I was asking for. And most of them were just like, the crazy American does not know what they're saying. And then that one person took the time to really try to listen to me and parse out what it was I was trying to say and was able to provide me with the answers I needed. And the time that they took, and it was only a couple of minutes, but that time that they took made all the difference to me. And I was able to get food. So that was a big deal. And even in Scotland, where they ostensibly speak the same language we do, the dialect is so different that you really had to listen very hard to understand what they were saying. And I'm sure the same was true of them with me. So there was definitely that effort that went into communication, even in a place where we were, in theory, speaking the same language. And I think that helped me to sort of apply those lessons that I learned in my job as well. But this is also something that I have done for many years. So to give you a little bit background on my experience, I started out in design. I started doing design a very long time ago, in before the turn of the millennia, and it was my primary focus. But as time went by, I started to do some web development, and then web development turned into software development. And so for several years, I was working doing coding and creating UIs. Um, and then when I got the job, my previous job, I was doing a lot of the design because there was a gap there. So I was doing a lot of the design work for them and sort of making those translations for the engineering team. And then when I came to my current job, the gap was even larger. There really needed to be somebody that took charge of the design. And that's when I really picked up the ball and started doing the design exclusively at Berkshire Grey. So I am the only UX person working at Berkshire Grey. And this, as you might imagine, I'm sure some of you have had to deal with this, it can be a challenge, especially with a company full of very highly technical people. So that's kind of what I wanted to focus on today. Um, and the the first thing I want to sort of outline is that challenge. What is the challenge we're facing when we're working with colleagues who are very technical minded? And so the goal here is to explore how we can use our UX principles and apply them to improve the communication and collaboration with our other UI UX team members, or even with other engineers throughout the company, because it's not always UI people that we need to have those conversations with. Sometimes we're providing UX or UI services to people who are outside of that UI spectrum. So some of the common issues that I tend to face, and I think are probably universal, are the difference in the terminology that the technical side of things use, and the terminology and jargon that we use. Sometimes those collide, and we just don't make any sense to one another when we're talking about the very same issue. The priorities can be very different. I was talking before I started about how I work in a robotics company. So a lot of the focus for most of the, especially the mechanical engineers, is very much on those mechanical pieces, the hardware, and on the software side, the coding and the functionality and the data. And I'm thinking about the user, as we all know, like that's our job. We're supposed to be advocating for the user and making sure that the user experience is the best quality we can provide. So our priorities are very, very different. A lot of times people will be very resistant to UX changes. They have it in mind that they want something to exist in a certain place because of where it fits in on the whole technical schema, but it doesn't work for the user. So we have to kind of make a point, make an argument for that UX change, and that can be really difficult because there can be technical constraints on that. And just collaborating with small teams in general when you're the only UX person can be very difficult. And if they're all very focused on the technical side of things, to try to sort of realign that conversation on something as simple as a human interaction can be very challenging. So those are essentially the challenges I think we face in those highly technical environments. And I'm going to touch on some of the ways that we can help alleviate that. So Engineer-ese, it is not its own language, but in a way it is, because language is not entirely about speech and words and how we communicate directly with somebody. A lot of times it's how we process thoughts, how we process information, and how that travels through and comes out again. So understanding how engineers communicate also involves understanding how they think. So there's some things that you can do to try to learn Engineer-ese. I think that when you have a base of tech-minded colleagues, their approach tends to be very much about problem solving. And when you're communicating with them, it's important to kind of understand that perspective. Like they're very logic-minded. They're about problem solving in that sort of puzzle and logic and data-driven way. So adjusting your tactics to include those ways of thinking can be very helpful. The next thing is the technical jargon, and this can be the thing that takes up a lot of your energy because there's so many things that they're immersed in that aren't part of our daily tasks. They're working in Kate's environment or MongoDB or all of these, back-end things that we're not even really touching those things. Our UI may be consuming them, but we're not really involved with the formation of them or how they interact with the middleware or anything. And all of that is technical stuff. We're talking about middleware, we're talking about APIs. Understanding what those terms mean and being able to hear them when they're, well, the API won't handle that. You can sort of grasp what they're trying to say and maybe come back with a good argument as to why we need to find a way for the API to handle a particular behavior. So understanding those terms can be very helpful in communicating with our devs. And there are a lot of glossaries out there. If you know the particular environments that your devs are working with, you can kind of look up some of the basic terminology for those, and just familiarize yourself with that sort of glossary or lexicon, and it'll help you to understand what they're talking about half the time. Again, with the problem solving approach, I have found that engineers want the points and the lines and everything has to be in a very logic driven focus. When you're working with object oriented programming, there is everyth's in its place and everything has a reason for being, and those lines that connect them have to have a good cause. There's case, when you talk to engineers about a new feature or something, there's always a case. There's a use case for why we're doing that. And if you can kind of present to them the problems that you're facing in a way that's a use case, they can sort of adopt that and understand why it needs a UX solution. And then you can kind of couch it in terms of, here's the UX solution that I'm suggesting. And sometimes they'll be a little more receptive, but it's definitely about really using their language and trying to approach it with that problem solving sort of bent. The feasibility, scalability, optimization, those are all things that they really want to focus on. So if you can make your UX solution kind of hone in on those sorts of details, they'll be very receptive to that. And that's pretty much this point, like aligning our goals and making our goals be harmonious with their goals is the best way to foster that collaboration. If I can say, well, if we do, if we make it so that the back end feeds the data to the user instead of the user having to make a selection every time, if we can intuit that selection and they don't have to do that, that optimizes the workflow. And then There you go. You've made an argument to them, and they can see the benefit for them in adopting your UX solution. So UX principles, I think what I'm most focused on is using that empathy that we foster, and that's like a big go-to for all of us, is just adopting sort of that understanding of what our user is going through when they're interacting with our product. And I think what I tend to do is I look at my devs as the users of my design products and the users of my workflow outlines. Any collateral that I'm producing that they use to do their job, I consider that my product that I'm supplying with them with, and they're my user. So I try to sympathize with them. And one of the ways that I do that is to try to understand the pain points that they might run into with some of the products that I'm delivering to them. So if I give them a design and they don't know how to use Figma and they don't understand how to determine the margins, obviously that's going to be a problem. They're going to sit there being frustrated with me and with the product. And if what I can do is in my definition on the wiki, I explain how to find those things in Figma, then they have learned how to do that, and there's just less frustration all around. So redundancy of explanation, it feels like you're doing extra, but if you have devs coming and going, it can be really helpful to them, and it's a good way to get rid of pain points. And you can ask them about what is your frustration with, obviously not in those terms, but like, how did you find my design? Was it easy to use? Were things that could be better? Those are all things that you can do. And just like we ask our users open, meaningful questions, we want to do the same thing with our devs. We want to give them an open opportunity to speak to the products that we're delivering to them. So we might ask, hey, that design I presented last week, did you find that easy to understand? Was there anything I could do better? And then just wait for them to return with their thoughts. And I find that when you're receptive to that and when you offer those opportunities, they can be really helpful. So the other thing to do is once you've asked those questions and they've come back to you with some of their thoughts, make sure you repeat back to them what your understanding is of that. And the fact that you are able to do that makes them feel heard, seen, listened to, and everybody likes that. So the next thing, and I think this is really important, especially in the case of highly technical people and engineers and devs, they want to have clear, concise communication from you. They don't want to have long, lengthy discussions. So use the most simple language that you can to get your point across. And sometimes it's going to be a little lengthy, but if you're very precise, it can help with sort of that union of personalities that you have to have on your team. Avoid the UX jargon when you're talking about your designs or your UX suggestions. We don't want to talk about mind mapping or A/B testing or breadcrumbs on a site or our users' cognitive load or heuristics. Those are all terms that we know, but devs don't really, I mean, they're not really exposed to that. So they're not going to know what you're talking about, or they're really going to feel like you're just using words to make yourself sound like you know what you're talking about, which hopefully we do. But they just want to know what those things are. So you just start out with explaining what it is rather than just using terminology like that. Now we've also spent our time to understand the language of the environment they're working in. So we should use that as much as possible when we're talking about our UX suggestions and our designs. So if they're working, we have a driver we call a supervisor. It tells our robots what to do. So if I'm talking about that, I'm going to call it the supervisor. I'm not going to call it robot land, which sometimes we do that, but I'm going to be specific about using that terminology. If I'm talking about data from MongoDB, I'm going to specifically call out the data from MongoDB. So use those terms that they're familiar with, and try to steer clear of the terms that are specific to our trade. I think at the end of the day, aligning with their goals as much as possible is the best way to engender that trust and mutual mutual aid that you want to get to in your team. And so when we tell them, well, this user experience is bad because the user feels this, they're not going to be as invested as if we say, when the user experiences this, they're going to interact with your product in this particular way, and that's going to result in efficiency loss. Those kinds of conversations tend to resonate more with our technical minded people. So the next thing is visual aids, and we all know that visual aids, especially for the executive side of thing, they just give it to me in the quick and easy to digest. But I think devs are very similar in that way, where they're looking at code all day, they're looking at wiki documentation and Stack Overflow, and they just want to know, what am I doing? Give me the quicks. So diagrams are good if you can kind of give workflows and that kind of thing, where you're showing how the procession of your UX workflow is going to go. An easy workflow diagram is good. Charts and graphs showing your data that you've collected, where, hey, when we implemented this particular feature for the user, it increased efficiency and optimized their interactions by X amount. If they see a graph, they're going to be like, yes, and they're going to trust your opinions going forward more likely. And of course, then we get to like wireframes. So one of the things that we run into a lot is if you go really deep with a design before you've had a chance to really make your devs understand it, they might come back to you with stuff that completely changes it. So if you can present them with a quick wireframe and say, this is my design concept, it gives them a chance to give you feedback that's going to be really useful in developing your finalized designs. And then, of course, prototyping. We want to provide them with as much information about the design as they can. I combine my prototyping with wikis so that I'm giving them sort of the overview of all the specific design elements that they need to focus on. And then they can use the Figma prototype to dig in and look at any minor details that they need. But making sure that all of that is really like visually easy to access. Pictures on the wiki are something I use screen caps and just put them in there so they can quickly reference that. And then the last thing is photographs. Like, take photographs of where the user is going to be standing, where in space they are. Take pictures of how the UI is going to be mounted, of the different parts of your product that are impacted by the design of the UI, so that they understand why you made the decisions you did. Those can be really, really helpful. So one of the things that I run into a lot is, because UX and tech are not always perfectly aligned, we have some pretty difficult discussions about our objectives, and sometimes they don't align at all, and they can be very lengthy discussions. They can be difficult, they can be stressful, and sometimes they can be downright combative, and that is not a work environment anybody enjoys. So trying to use your skills as a UX person to realign and maybe readjust how that conversation is happening can be really good. So, of course, active listening. We always practice this when we talk about our users and when we're listening to feedback from our users. Active listening, we want to make sure that we're listening to understand, not just to respond. So we're not just looking them in the eyes while they're talking. We're actively listening and allowing what they're saying to be digested. We're not already thinking about our responses. And everybody here, I'm sure, understands active listening involves that. So use that when you're talking with your devs and they're providing you with feedback. It's just like your users. So, and once you're in that conversation, ask your open-ended questions, get their perspective on the topic, and really try to put yourself in their position and understand what it is. If they have a difference of opinion with you about your design, maybe you can dig down to exactly why they have a difference of opinion with you. And that can sometimes open avenues that you hadn't thought of before. Validating and acknowledging people on all fronts is always a really good thing to do. So you acknowledge their concerns and you validate their perspectives. So if they come to you and say, I really didn't like this design, I thought it was just too many colors. Oh, I can totally see where you might feel that way. I've definitely heard that from other people. That's a totally valid perspective. And you don't even need to follow that up with anything. You can just allow them that sort of basking in the validation of their thoughts. They're not always going to deliver them in the most thoughtful way. So it's like with anything else, we take our ego out of that and we sort of receive their criticism just the way we would from a user. So back to empathy, we need to remember they may have spilled their coffee on their lap on their way to work. Their kids might have been screaming. They might have had their boss yelling to them earlier. We don't know what's going on in their day. And so if they come at us with a lot of attitude or they're very aggressive with their opinion, just try to remember that they're human like us and we don't know what they're going through. So asking those open-ended questions and really listening to them and validating them can kind of help diffuse that. So hopefully, once we've done that, we get to a place where we can be more collaborative in our approach. We've kind of let them feel listened to, and now maybe we can really talk and dig into the problem. So one of the things that I find is really helpful is if we frame our discussions in a way that's addressing both our UX concerns and the technical needs they have. If there's limited data and they don't know if they can provide enough feedback from the back end to support whatever UX design that you've come up with, that's a conversation that you can have. And rather than being like, well, you have to do that because the user needs this. And they're like, well, that's going to be really difficult. And I'm going to have to get 3 other teams to try to do. Now you've become adversarial and you're not working on a common solution. So doing something like, okay, well, I think it's really important that the user is able to do this thing. What do you think we can do that might support that? Or maybe there's a third option that we can use that would be better. And just take their concerns into account, try not to get into that adversarial space. I'm guilty of that sometimes too, because it can be very difficult to maintain neutrality when you're trying to support the user experience and you're trying to advocate for the user, and you feel like that you're just being shot down all over the place. But we're skilled at this. We are trained in this, so we use that to try to diffuse the adversarial nature that can happen, or that just atmosphere of discord. So the other thing to do is just keep an open channel at all times, whether it's on Slack or, you're just walking around the office and you just open to people. Hey, how you doing? How's that project going? Just keep those open channels available to your devs and your other engineers, and allow them to make suggestions whenever they want. Be open, receptive, and validating to those. And then the other thing is a lot of devs and a lot of engineers won't initiate conversations about their thoughts. A lot of times they'll just be sit quietly with their thoughts and it won't come up until later. And maybe you don't have all the information you need to have a really good design for your UX. So make sure you reach out, especially if you notice these people who are just sort of sitting back and being quiet, reach out and ask them their thoughts. And a lot of times you get really great suggestions from them. So you know, again, that can be on Slack, that can be in the break room, whatever you feel comfortable doing. And then when somebody offers an insight or a thought or suggestion that helps you out, even if it's only a little bit, even if it just kind of opens a channel or makes you think about something, make sure when you're presenting your design or you're presenting your ideas that you loop them in and that you call that out. People love kudos. They love to be acknowledged for their assistance. So if you're like, oh, hey, Joe was suggesting that maybe blue would have been better for that particular button. And you know what? When I tried it out, it was really great. I'm so glad you suggested that. And now he feels good and he goes home feeling like he did something to help design. And it's just sort of a weird and happy feeling because that's not an area of the business that they're involved in very often. So um and now we get to like the really serious stuff. And we're talking about driving our discussions about UX solutions with data. So one of the things that I've run into is we don't have a lot of resources allotted to user studies. In fact, we have almost none. So collecting user data is so difficult for me. Trying to encourage my company to invest in you know, that kind of user study is difficult because their focus is very much on other things and getting those sales and getting those robotics machines up and running. So this is kind of an afterthought, which is totally understandable in a company like this. So what we got to do is we got to collect data from similar studies, from similar organizations or other kind of heuristic studies and those kinds of things. And we kind of gather that sort of data as much as you can. That it can be difficult. If you're lucky, you have a really robust user study program, and then you can collect all that data and it's really great. But I'm unfortunately not in that situation. So I try to collect as much as I can from external sources. Really important in that understanding of the technical side of things is really understanding what the technical scope of the needs for the system or the feature or whatever the product deliverable is. You really need to understand what the technical needs and scopes are. So for instance, if we're having a piece of feedback on the screen and it's including a bunch of product data, we need to know exactly what product data is available, what our customers have for product data, what the data looks like, the shape of it when it comes to the front end so that we can properly assess how to display it. So having a good sense of that back end piece and what it delivers to us and the shape of that can be really important to the scope of the design, because when we're presenting that to our devs, they will sort of respect your solution more if you very clearly understand what they're dealing with and what they have to work with. So that can be really vital in having these discussions about your designs and the UX concepts and suggestions that you're giving them. If you're making any of these UX recommendations, that especially the ones that kind of completely change the current state of things, it's really good to have compelling case for that that's driven by data, whether you have graphs or you have like a spreadsheet of you know, points of pain points and user interactions. When you come to the developers with these and say, this is why I made this choice, it's harder for them to argue with that. And it's easier for them to understand why you went in the direction you went. So just giving them everything that helps you to make those decisions if they ask for it. Obviously, you want to keep things simple and not overload them with too much information all at once, but having it there in your back pocket when they start to question things can be really handy. Um, so the next thing I want to go through is just sort of how this plays out in certain scenarios with those conversations with your devs. Um, I think we all know about our user stories, and I think everybody has sort of a different way of approaching these. Some people, they're very data driven. Some people are more lyrical, I would say. Um, I try to do something kind of in the middle. Um, Devs get, especially high tech environments, they get very caught up in, the machinery, the software, and they're just very, um, things can get very technical, clinical. They're not really thinking about people very much. So when I'm talking about one of our users, sometimes I'll just like, yeah, so Mike is 84 years old. And this is his retirement job. And he comes in and uses these systems, but like he's not really tech savvy. He's the kind of guy who really loves like to listen to rock music, but doesn't know how to use YouTube. So he has his grandkids come over and tell him. And you just sort of make this like story that they can kind of identify with. It becomes something more human to them than just, Mike, who's 84. He's on our system and he's going to be doing this job. If you kind of give him sort of a back personality, yeah, his wife Frances, she's a personality. Sometimes she just comes in the office and yells at him for no reason. Um, but it gives them kind of a view into that world where the user is not just interacting with a system the way you want them to. They're interacting with the system or the program as a human being, and they're going to be distracted by things and they're going to have their own whole world. So using those things in your user stories helps the devs to sort of align with that. And so this is where those conversations in the break rooms come in. You're talking to your coworker Joe, and you're like, "Hey Joe, I heard you were like in a tennis competition this weekend. How did that go?" And you hear about what they're doing, and maybe you learn a little bit about their music tastes or whatever, and you can use that to integrate into your stories. Um, and obviously, this only works if you're a relatively medium to small size company, so that you actually know all your devs. But just understanding their world a little bit helps you to kind of draw them in and make your stories more compelling for them. If you know their grandfather's name is Ted, you can make the user Ted, and now he knows a little bit more just intrinsically about this person being a human being. So straight up, like empathy is not always a strong suit for devs, and we sometimes have to guide them to that. They're like, oh well, if a user has this problem with our system, yeah, they can just get over it. They can just work around it. They'll just, if I'm trying to think of a good example. If there's no beep when they scan something, whatever, they'll figure it out. They can just look at the screen. But like, you have to explain to them, yeah, but Mike is really old and like he can't see the screen very well, and he's a little slow. So when he pulls something over that scanner, it's really good to have that immediate feedback so he knows that he did a good job scanning it and he can move that item to the next position. Um, Giving them something to sort of empathize with the person. If I know that Joe has like tennis elbows, like, well, maybe we don't want to position this here because, if somebody has tennis elbow, it's really going to be a stretch to get that all the way over to this other side. It makes it personal. It allows them to empathize with the user a little bit more. And that's kind of what we want. We want to bring them into our user story. And I've already touched on this, but tying it to something personal. If they're into video games, maybe you can use that to explain a particular user pain point. Hey, you know, when you're trying to do that one mission in I don't know, Escape from Tarkov. And every time you do that, you keep getting shot from behind. Well, when the user's trying to do this particular thing, they can't see what's coming up the conveyor. It's kind of like that. So we need to readjust where the UI is so that they can see all possible avenues of their job, and they're not surprised by things coming down the conveyor. Things like that can make it a little easier for them to align with your thoughts. The other thing is, don't be obvious. Don't be like, hey, I'm like actively manipulating you right now by using your personal stories. Just, you know, tie things in subtly or make it playful, but don't be like obvious about your attempts to Shanghai their thoughts and make them see your point. Just, you know, subtly bring those sort of energies, the camaraderie that you're gaining with them into your user stories. So this is one that I've run into quite a bit. You have to sometimes demonstrate to your devs exactly what the pain points are, because they, for instance, software, they use this software every day. They're programming it, they're in it, they live this software, they know it upside down and backwards. So they stop noticing pain points. They're just jumping over them like they're nothing, because they just know that they're just skip over them. They don't even notice them anymore. So when you try to explain to them, this is a pain point and our users are definitely having a problem with it, they don't really see it. So sometimes what you have to do is give them, you know, sit them down in front of something, give them completely different data or whatever that they're not used to, so that they can firsthand run into that pain point. This can be hard sometimes if they're really familiar with the product that you're using. So instead of using a firsthand, you can sometimes show a user running into that pain point using a video, or maybe you go and stand right there where the user is using the product and they can watch that user struggle with that particular piece. Either way, if they can observe it happening, sometimes that'll suddenly bring it back to their mind. Oh yeah, I used to have a problem with that. If none of those things are available or going to work, then sometimes you can sort of use an analogous thing. Maybe you know that this is a pain point in another piece of software, and you can demonstrate that to them so that they go, oh yeah, now I see. I hate this on this thing. Oh yeah, we have that on our software too. Oh yeah, we probably shouldn't do that. So sometimes just using an analogous product and showing them the pain point there would be enough to sort of trigger the memory of that in them for the pain point that you're trying to fix on your own product. And I don't like this one, but sometimes this is the only one that works. When all else fails, wait. Sometimes you just cannot convince them. You know you're right. You know this is going to be a problem, but you cannot convince them to align with you on the solution, and you just have to go a different direction. So make sure you document all your suggestions. You write them down, you write down your reasoning, you write down the pain points, and you explain what you think is going to be the result of not doing your recommendation. All that stuff's documented, and when it inevitably becomes a problem, post-release, you have the solution. You know you did your best to try and warn them about this potential problem, and now you're ready to solve it. And that means that the next time they might be a little more receptive to your ideas, and you can have that discussion. So I'm actually going to move to questions now, and then we can kind of go into a summary after that. I don't know where how we want to do this.
Thank you so much, Julie. Yeah, no, great talk so far. For anybody too who didn't get the game reference, Escape from Tarkov is a game where if you beat somebody, you take all of the money and items they own. So it is not a game that breeds empathy and teamwork. So that's a very appropriate selection there. Yeah, and empathy too. Love seeing that theme recurring. Really responded with everybody. Rachel, great comment in the chat on dealing with this also professionally and personally. Reminding yourself this is not personal. These are people struggling with the same problems, trying to understand and foresee challenges. Really resonated with the audience. So great, great theme there. Again, if anybody has questions, feel free to drop them in. A couple I'd love to put in front of you based on what you've been reviewing here. Thinking back to the problem solving approach you were talking through, where it helps for engineers for everything to be logical, aligned, have that clear cause and use case. Do documents like journey maps or service blueprints, you mentioned a little bit of customer personas, do these kinds of things help make your design arguments, especially something like a journey map or a service blueprint, to show how the flow improves? Really map things out that way.
Yeah, I think it would. I'll be honest, I don't get the opportunity to do that very often. I
Hmm.
am hit with new features and new designs pretty much on a weekly basis. So, so
Wow.
trying to get stuff turned around and get things delivered to dev means I don't get a lot of time to do that. And also with the lack of access to my users makes it kind of hard. So I have to kind of go off of what I know is your standard warehouse user. I've been on site in a number of them, so I kind of have a rapport with some of our users, but I don't have a lot of time to like really build these sort of like journey maps and that kind of thing. I would love to. I would, and
Yeah.
I'll be honest though, I'm not sure that they would be super convincing for to developers. I don't, that's
Hmm.
more of a, that's more of an executive appeal, I think. When you're talking,
Okay.
you know what I'm saying? Like, I think
Yeah.
those kinds of things really appeal to like our customers, uh, our customer facing parts of our company, like marketing and sales and just our big executives that deal with some of the bigger companies. I think the devs are just like, yeah. I don't need that all that information. That's a lot. So
Sure. Yeah, they are a lot to digest most of the time. On that note as well, balancing all of this by yourself, you're trying to, take care of all these new projects, create all these new features. How do you balance that with supporting things you've sent out and you've passed along? Are you working towards creating any kind of, culture of self-review within the team so you can, trust you hand something off, you hand recommendations, and they're doing their best to adhere to them on their own.
So I have kind of two sides to what I do. There's the sort of product side where I'm going to each of the individual products and I talk with them about what are their needs, what are their requirements, what are we going to deliver to you. Then I come back and I start doing some of my like workflow stuff and I start thinking about user profile and how that's going to impact what we display on the screen, all that stuff. And then I go to my team, the UI team, and I was like, here are my ideas. And I give them like a fig jam, like loose wireframe thing. And
Gotcha.
yeah, and then I'll come back with the complete design. I include a wiki that has a full description of the workflow and all of the details that may not be super obvious in Figma. And they have the opportunity to sort of give me questions and that kind of thing. And then when they're actually working on it, we tend to work pretty closely and I review all their PRs. So
Okay, got
uh,
it.
yeah. So I mean that's a sort of a thing that like if you don't have any engineering experience, that can be kind of difficult to go in and look at the PRs and like call out, hey, what are you doing there with the CSS? That's not gonna work. um,
Yep.
so that gives me an ability to sort of to make sure we're in alignment, that they're following the designs, and then, we're all on the same page, and we can have those
Got
conversations.
it. Yeah, and great to have that kind of process and those checkpoints in place for sure, especially to make the most use of your time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
I need like two more of me.
Question two. Oh, yeah. A question too, kind of on your background, being familiar to jump in, review those pull requests. How many languages, are you proficient in? What's kind of your background in development engineering there? And how do you find that helps you, being able to collaborate with developers working really in their environment?
So I will say that I haven't done any real development in the last 3 years, so I'm kind of losing some of it. But prior to that, I did work, obviously HTML5, JavaScript, CSS is all part of that. I worked with libraries like React, the proprietary library that I used in my last job, which was based off of Torso. No, it was based off of Backbone. It was called Torso. um, and then I have some background in like C plus from some of the stuff that I was doing in my previous job. So, oh, and Python. so, so
Awesome.
I'm pretty fluent with CSS because that's probably the thing I use most and that I have to catch most. Um, but oh, and SVGs, because I work with SVGs constantly. We use SVGs for all of our like system maps that I create. So I have to be very familiar with those. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Nice wide range of skills to draw from. That's fantastic. You mentioned too, when you're conducting it, you're sharing those initial concepts, you're giving people the opportunity to field questions. How do you structure that kind of a design review for a primarily non-designer audience?
So it depends. Like sometimes my audience is just the UI team and they have a bit more of a concept of the design end of things. And sometimes it's the product team. And those can get really challenging because they all have opinions and think they're designers. It's like at least the people on my team, they know, like they know the difference, but the people on the other teams are they have a lot of opinions. So I think that you have to balance the like listening part with the like we need to get through this design review. It can be a bit challenging because they'll pipe in a lot. So one of the things I do is like I need to just really quickly blow through this design and I'll explain everything that I have in detail. And when we get to the end of this, if you have any thoughts or questions, we can present them then. So that is usually what I do with those teams. And with the UI team, I allow them to kind of interject and have a more fluid dialogue with me.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, great perspectives there. And again, meeting your audience, matching their tone, always an important skill there. Sorry, Cal, I saw you have your hand raised there. Floor is yours.
Yeah, just one question that I was thinking about. You mentioned that when um, developers aren't receptive to whatever you're recommending, that you document whatever your original thoughts were and stuff, so that when things go awry, you can kind of resurface it and be like, see. So like, I'm wondering how you can really go about that without being like, I told you so, or like being off-putting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult to not have any of that, like, because you're gonna
Yeah.
have to bring it up somehow, and you're like, so one of the things that is helpful in my job is I use Jira just right alongside the developers. So I have Jira tickets for my designs. So every time I come back, like I fill out the Jira ticket, I have the wiki, everything's documented. Any conversations I had are documented on the ticket. I can link to the Slack conversation where I asked that question. And it's already in the ticket. So like when they come back and say, oh, we had customer feedback about this particular thing where they're having a problem with this, I can do the little Oh man, I think we talked about that at one point. Let me see if I can dig up the ticket. And then I just post a ticket.
Yeah, that's very smart. Yeah, I was just thinking about how I would do it, and I was like, I don't know, like in my last job, if that would have came off wrong, but I mean, it's got
Yeah,
to be done. It's got to be done at some point.
it
So,
does. And I tend to be a like really friendly person, and so like people don't generally, I think sometimes like if you set up that perception of like, oh hey, I'm like really fun and friendly, that when you come with one of those like, hey, I did bring this up, they almost take it like a silly, you're like, oh, I feel like I mentioned that once or twice. And they'll laugh. They'll not take it as a criticism. And, so it's kind of like playing that whole, you know, putting on the mask of the jolly UX person. But um
yeah.
also like I really like most of my coworkers, so it's just kind of like delivering it that in that friendly I told you so kind of way, just like you do with your friend when they do that thing you told them not to do, and you're like, I'm pretty sure I told you not to do that, didn't I?
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great. And just time check. I know we're just in the last few minutes here. Any final questions before we hand it off for the wrap up? All right. I know I certainly would love to hear more war stories, but we won't keep everybody all night.
So yeah, I have a summary slide here. It's just basically some key points here. Learn how to talk to your dev, speak their language, understand how they think. That's a big one. Learn the jargon and the technology, tech terms. Remember that they're your user too. So all of those things that you use to empathize with your user, use that also with your devs. And then adapt your designs to fit their needs when they give you feedback. Make sure that you're explaining things to your devs using logic and explaining why you came to the conclusions you did, because they like to know the reasons and the logic behind things. Conflict is going to happen, so make sure you're trying to solve that together and not just butting heads with each other. And we all learned those skills, so that's just part of our UX training, is just listening, understanding, and trying to be the sort of voice of reason that leads things from a less to a less adversarial tone. And then just keep coming back to they're very functional, logical, efficient minded people, so stick with that. And then the last thing is like, always champion your user. At the end of the day, that's our job. We have to champion our users. Sometimes that means conflict, sometimes that means hurdles and challenges, but that's our goal at the end of the day. And then a couple of pieces of my contact information. Thank you, everybody.
I unmuted. Yes, thank you so much, Julie. This is a wonderful presentation. Really appreciate your time putting this all together. Again, it's collaboration is so important, and I love your ability to take these very important skills for the end work we do, and directly apply them to doing the work itself. It's such a huge valuable skill to be able to build that kind of teamwork, especially with somebody who has such a short amount of resources to work with and manage, being a single operative within the organization. So wonderful. Thank you so much again, everybody. We'll wrap up the meeting here for tonight. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you
Take
very
care.
much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.